Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
A widower doctor appeared in court for saving a homeless woman instead of providing urgent assistance to a prosecutor. But when an exact copy walked into the room, Emilio was a doctor by nature, coming from a family of medical professionals. His father taught at the medical institute, and his mother was an ophthalmologist. From an early age, the boy firmly decided that he wanted to work in a hospital. He played doctor, treating toys, bugs, and spiders. His parents were both charmed by the sight and a bit frightened. They knew all too well how difficult and stressful their jobs were. Moreover, their work demanded a lot of time and energy. Incidentally, they only managed to have a child closer to 40. Initially, they postponed this important moment due to their busy work schedules, which they loved. Later on, health issues arose. The couple had nearly given up hope of becoming parents. After tears and worries, they decided to let it go. After all, life had many other joys and meanings. They took it as a sign to return to their work with renewed energy. Soon after, Isabella felt unwell and weak. Thinking she was overworked, she booked a stay at a sanatorium. However, her condition didn't improve there, and she began to suspect something was wrong. Could I be pregnant? She wondered to herself. All the signs were there, but how could it be? They had given up on the idea. Yet, the couple soon realized that miracles do happen. Returning home, she didn't rush to tell her husband the good news. First, she made an appointment with a gynecologist colleague to confirm her suspicion. The doctor confirmed it. The older patient was expecting her first child. The future mother burst into tears right in the chair. When she returned home in tears, her husband was very alarmed. "Isabella, what's wrong? Did the head doctor get on your nerves again? I've been telling you to quit and stay home, take care of the house." "I'll work, my salary is good enough for us," said the worried man. "It might be enough for 2, but not for 3, she replied, sniffling. Then she continued, "Ramiro, I'm not crying because of the head doctor or anything bad. My tears are of joy. I'm pregnant, my dear. Soon there will be 3 of us." Her husband didn't know what to say. He couldn't believe his luck. The future father couldn't hold back his emotions. He cried and hugged his wife. "Isabella, could it be true?" he asked. "Yes, Ramiro, it is. I'm already 3 months along. I didn't realize what was happening with me. I never even considered I could be pregnant," Isabella explained. "Now we need to take even better care of you." Her husband embraced her. She nodded happily. Ramiro kept his word and surrounded his wife with care and love. This was one of the happiest times in their lives. 6 months later, Emilio was born, a true giant weighing 4 kilograms and 200 grams. The boy was very bright, growing by leaps and bounds, and delighting his parents. Nevertheless, as he grew older, both his mother and father hoped he would change his mind about following in their footsteps. "Son, maybe you should consider becoming an engineer," his mother would try to persuade him. "There, you have fixed working hours, fewer overtimes, and you don't work with people, although it is still a responsible job." "No, I have decided I will become a doctor. A surgeon. I want to save people, and no one can change my mind." The parents could only sigh sadly. Emilio graduated from school with honors and easily got into a medical institute on a scholarship. Studying was easy for him, despite the enormous amount of information. "Blood is thicker than water," acquaintances would say. This is what it means for a person to have a calling. But Emilio tried not to be conceited, even though the temptations were great, and he kept reminding himself, "No star disease. I just want to be a doctor who treats people. That's all. The stars are in the movies and the theater," the young man would say. His parents were proud of their son, but something still worried them. He didn't have a personal life. Emilio grew up as a reserved young man who didn't let anyone into his inner world. His mom and dad respected his position and didn't pester him with unnecessary questions. However, concerned that their son was too absorbed in his studies, the father decided to take matters into his own hands, albeit very carefully. They decided to invite old family friends over after the father happened to run into a school friend on the street. They talked, reminisced about their childhood, and realized they were still on the same wavelength and would be happy to continue their friendship. Moreover, it turned out that both had children of the same age. The friend had a daughter named Laura. She was Emilio's age and studied food technology, planning to work at a confectionery factory where her mother worked. My daughter is a real gem. Smart, beautiful, athletic. She studies well, has a waist-length braid, and does track and field. Long eyelashes, a slender waist, she has it all. But there's one but, she's very shy. She'll be graduating from college next year, and she still doesn't have a fiancé. It worries me, the friend confessed. You know, our meeting was arranged by the stars, because I have a son growing up, a wonderful young man, also very shy. He studies excellently. I think he has a brilliant future in medicine. He'll surpass both me and his mother. But his personal life isn't working out either, Ramiro replied. Well, then it's decided. We'll introduce them, the friend rejoiced. But we have to do it very carefully. They're at an age where they don't like it when people interfere in their personal lives and, as they say, violate their personal boundaries. Of course, we'll arrange everything properly. By a happy coincidence, my wife's birthday is in 2 weeks. We've been talking for a long time about celebrating it not just in a small circle. We could gather some guests. So consider yourselves invited, said the man. The friends shook hands and said goodbye, meeting again at the agreed time. The family friend arrived with his wife and daughter. The man had not exaggerated, Laura was very beautiful. Seeing her, Emilio noticeably blushed and whispered to his father reproachfully. Why didn't you warn me that there would be a girl? We didn't agree on this. What's with the matchmaking? Son, why are you acting like a child? These are just our friends. Should we have invited only adults and asked their daughter to stay home? His father replied slyly. And don't talk nonsense about matchmaking. Who needs that? People are adults, you'll figure out your personal lives on your own. Emilio believed his father, and with the support of the other participants in the plan, everything was done to ensure Emilio and Laura got to know each other better. No one doubted they would like each other. And so it happened. Both the young man and the girl were very educated and polite. Moreover, it turned out they had a lot in common. They liked the same music and films, and both were interested in architecture. The parents watched them with smiles. The young people noticed this and felt embarrassed. Nevertheless, they didn't falter and exchanged phone numbers. After that, it was just a matter of time. Emilio gathered his courage and called Laura a couple of days later to invite her for a walk. She agreed without hesitation. At first, their meetings were very awkward, but they were filled with warmth and mutual sympathy from the beginning. They kissed only on their 5th date, and at that moment, Emilio firmly decided he would marry Laura. The girl, in turn, thought she would like to marry this young man. The young lovers didn't make their relationship public, although their parents knew about it and were delighted. A year passed. Laura graduated from university and got a job at a confectionery factory. Emilio entered a residency program. He still needed to continue mastering the basics of medicine. The couple continued to date, and their parents began hinting at marriage. Mom, I will definitely marry Laura. It's just a matter of time. But first, we need to figure out where we'll live, the young man replied. That's not a problem, son, his father responded. Your mother and I decided to sell our 3-room apartment. Anyway, when you move out, we won't need such a large living space. We'll buy 2 one-room apartments. And Laura's parents decided to buy you a car. We've already discussed it with them. So there's nothing to worry about. I don't even know how to thank you, Emilio said, taken aback. A simple thank you and being decent people who are very happy will suffice, his father replied. In light of new circumstances, the future doctor gathered his courage and proposed to his beloved a couple of weeks later, on her birthday. She accepted. They held their wedding in mid-January. The new year truly began anew. The young couple decided not to rush with children. They wanted to wait until Emilio settled into his job. They lived peacefully and harmoniously, setting up their nest and learning to drive together. When Emilio completed his residency and started working at the hospital, the young couple rejoiced that they would soon become parents. Both wanted this equally. However, things didn't go as planned. Laura struggled to conceive for a couple of years. Yet, before them was the example of Emilio's mother, who had given birth at 40 when all hope seemed lost. So, the young husband and wife weren't overly concerned. Eventually, their efforts paid off. The coveted 2 lines finally appeared on the test. The couple enthusiastically began buying baby supplies. "It's a bad omen, son. Let's wait for the baby to arrive," his mother insisted. "Why are you saying that?" Emilio resisted. "You're a progressive, educated woman. What bad omens?" "Laura and I don't want to rush buying everything later." "It's your decision," sighed the woman. Unfortunately, time proved her right. In the 5th month, Laura suffered a miscarriage, which was a true tragedy for the young couple. Emilio took it even harder than his wife did. The young woman had a resilient psyche. She cried for several days, took a couple of weeks off, and then realized she was ready for the next stage in life. However, Emilio couldn't seem to recover. Despite his wife's pleas to try again for parenthood, he requested a postponement. "I'm not ready yet," he replied. "I feel guilty for not being able to protect you." "Don't worry, darling," Laura reassured him. A year passed. Meanwhile, the young surgeon's career gained momentum. He was a gifted doctor, recognized by both colleagues and patients. People were already lining up for surgeries with him, despite his relatively young age. Emilio was flattered by this. He felt at home in his profession and was glad to be of service. Gradually, his personal life began to normalize. 2 years after their first unsuccessful pregnancy, Laura realized once again that she was expecting. This time, the excitement was even stronger, and Emilio believed in all the omens. He cherished his wife like the apple of his eye. Moreover, there was much to worry about. The pregnancy was difficult. She spent most of it in the hospital on bed rest. Then came premature labor. The baby was born weak and very small at 7 months. A heart defect was diagnosed. Despite all the family connections in the medical field, they couldn't save the baby. He lived exactly 2 weeks and passed away. This time, the family was hit with an even stronger grief. Laura fell into a severe depression. This time, Emilio had to be her main support. "Darling, we're all in great pain right now, but we will get through this. I promise you. Let's give each other time and try again," the grieving husband reassured his wife. But Laura was inconsolable. She responded indifferently, saying she was cursed and would never become a mother. She didn't even want to try again. Dark times descended upon the couple. Fortunately, Emilio bravely shouldered everything, finding the strength to pull Laura out of profound apathy. A whole year passed like this. Another year was needed to persuade her to try once more to become parents. Meanwhile, they weren't getting any younger, and Laura still couldn't conceive again. When Emilio suggested adopting a child, she shouted at him. "Have you already given up on me?" the woman asked accusingly. "No, of course not, my love," Emilio replied. "But one thing doesn't rule out the other. Let's adopt a baby and continue trying for our own." Laura categorically refused. She fell back into depression, becoming distraught and apathetic once more. "I'm very worried about her, Emilio," her father-in-law said with concern. "I fear what might happen to her in this state." "Everything will be fine, I assure you," her son-in-law replied. "I have a month's leave coming up. It was supposed to start in a couple of days, but the management asked me to postpone it because there are too many surgeries right now." We'll take a vacation, go to a sanatorium, and everything will work out. Emilio himself fervently believed that this plan would work. They just had to wait for the long-awaited break. Emilio needed it desperately. He was exhausted and depleted. However, they never got to take that vacation together. A tragedy struck the family. Laura was hit by a car. She died instantly. She had gone out in her usual distracted state that evening to buy bread and decided to cross the road not at the designated crossing, but just 20 meters away from it. She didn't notice the black Toyota speeding towards her. The Toyota hit her, and she was thrown 50 meters. There was no chance of survival. The ambulance arrived promptly but declared her dead at the scene. Ramiro rushed to the accident scene as fast as he could. Seeing his wife's bloodied body, he fell to his knees, crying out with rhetorical questions. Why? For what reason? But he never received an answer. Many people attended the young woman's funeral. Laura was very kind, and this was greatly appreciated by her friends and colleagues. Everyone approached the deceased's parents and Emilio, offering words of sympathy and support, but it didn't ease the pain. Thus, at the age of 34, Emilio became a widower. The driver who hit Laura was apprehended. It turned out to be a prominent businessman with connections. I want him to be punished, Emilio reasoned. I understand that my wife was crossing the road not entirely according to the rules. But firstly, she was very close to the crossing, and secondly, he was speeding recklessly. If he hadn't violated the rules, I'm sure this tragedy could have been avoided because he would have been able to brake in time. Friend, I hate to disappoint you, but the chances of him facing proper punishment are slim, replied his lawyer friend, who had volunteered to represent the victims in this case. The circumstances are quite contentious, and there's another nuance. This businessman is tight with the city prosecutor, Senor Malara. You know what that means. However, Emilio held onto his belief in justice until the very end. He wanted the driver to be jailed despite all his connections. But everything turned out exactly as his lawyer friend had predicted. The motorist was protected, his connections helped him with the oversight agency. The prosecutor did not push for harsh punishment, shifting responsibility onto Laura. In the end, the driver got away with a suspended sentence. And after the hearing, Emilio saw with his own eyes how the driver warmly shook hands with Prosecutor Malara, both of them wearing satisfied smiles. And this was just 200 meters from the courthouse, no shame, no conscience. The widower struggled for a long time to believe what had happened and to come to terms with it. But he couldn't fight the system, simply lacking the necessary administrative resources. And moral ones too. Problems began at work, his mind was heavy, his hands unsteady. Management noticed, and the head of surgery called him in. Emilio, I think you need to take a break. A longer one. Rest, mourn, and finally find the strength to move forward. You're a talented surgeon. Maybe your mission in this world is to help others, the doctor said. Yes, but I couldn't even help my own wife, I couldn't protect her. Why would I take leave now when I should have taken it earlier and taken Laura to the seaside? Maybe this tragedy wouldn't have happened then, Emilio replied, choked with emotion. All of this is just speculation, my dear. If only things had been different. No one knows what would have been better. Now we have what we have. Laura will always remain in your heart. Time heals, things will slowly get better, and your leave, it's already decided. I've prepared the paperwork, you're off for a month. Just sign in the right place, the head doctor said. Emilio didn't resist, he listened to the advice of his senior colleague, and the next day he bought train tickets. He decided to go to the mountains, breathe fresh air, let go of all the heavy thoughts, and reboot. Maybe I should come with you, his father suggested. Thank you, but no need, Dad. Firstly, you're not young anymore, such a journey would be hard for you. Secondly, I really need to be alone right now and sort out my feelings, his son replied. And so it was. Just a couple of days later, Emilio was on a train heading towards the mountains. Fellow passengers in his compartment tried to engage him in conversation, even offering him food. but he politely kept his distance. In the mountains themselves, he stubbornly guarded his right to personal space. The head doctor was right, this leave was vital for him. It helped him find a second wind. Emilio returned from his journey a different person. The pain of loss hadn't faded naturally, but at least it had subsided. At home, Emilio realized he wanted to change his place of residence. Staying in the apartment where he had lived with his wife became unbearable. He decided to take decisive action, quickly found buyers for his home, sold the apartment, and soon purchased a new one in another neighborhood. "Son, why did you buy another studio apartment?" his mother asked. "You could afford a 2-bedroom now." "Why would I need it, Mom?" Emilio clarified. "Well, why not?" "For the future," his mother delicately replied, hinting that life wasn't over and he still had every chance to remarry and build another family. Emilio didn't like this hint. He hadn't even entertained the thought of another woman entering his life. His mother didn't press him further. Amidst the bustle of moving, things became easier. Emilio enjoyed furnishing his new apartment, and his spirits lifted. Work also started falling into place again. Surgeries came one after another, his surgical skills improving. Patients lined up to see him again, and he threw himself into his work. Collectively, these tasks and responsibilities helped him to somewhat bear the first year without Laura. "See, I told you time heals," the head doctor patted him on the shoulder. "Did you ever consider trying to talk to another woman?" Senor Simon asked. "Of course not, Senor Simon. I never considered it and doubt I ever will." "I loved Laura deeply," Emilio replied firmly. "Your call. Just remember, the hospital ward floor isn't the only thing keeping an eye on you. And some patients, too. You're still young. I'm not sure you should be closing yourself off," the doctor said before heading to the operating room. But Emilio decided to stick to his principles, no other women. He couldn't even look at them, although he noticed how some nurses and certain relatives who visited patients after surgery flirted with him. The surgeon maintained a stern and unapproachable demeanor, yet nothing stopped him from developing friendly relationships. Moreover, it was these friendships that helped him cope with his emotional pain. He resumed communication with his university friends. They played football together on weekends and sometimes went to bars. Most of his friends were married with children, but among them were also bachelors, some divorced, others still single despite reaching a fairly mature age. One of the latter was Alonzo. After medical school, he briefly worked as a therapist in a hospital but quickly realized it wasn't for him. Despite the surprised looks of those around him, he decided to pursue his dream. He retrained as a programmer, and his journey into IT began. And it turned out to be quite successful. "That's what it means to listen to yourself rather than follow the crowd," Alonzo would say. "The same goes for your personal life. I won't go with the majority and rush into marriage just because it's supposed to be time. I'll marry only when I meet the right one." And it seems that moment had arrived. Alonzo fell in love. He met a girl on the street and fell in love at first sight. They were heading towards marriage. "You're invited, my friend," he announced to Emilio. "It's time to celebrate. We're planning a lavish wedding, that's what Catalina wants. I've decided not to resist. If it makes her happy, it makes me happy too." "Well, that's right," his friend smiled. "Thank you for the invitation. I'll definitely come, even though it's been a while since I've been to such events and lately I prefer to avoid them." Emilio kept his word and attended the celebration, though visibly nervous. He hadn't been to parties in a long time, especially not for such a reason. He was curious himself how his body would react to seeing a happily in love couple. Surprisingly, everything went smoothly. Watching Alonzo and Catalina, he couldn't help but smile. Just because his personal life hadn't worked out didn't mean he couldn't be happy for others. Everything unfolded beautifully, dancing, jokes, toasts, touching moments. Emilio sat at the same table with his friend, so he didn't feel lonely. He often caught the interested glances of single women who had long noticed the attractive guest without a wedding ring. But Emilio ignored all their hints. He came here to congratulate his friend, to distract himself and have a good time, nothing more. Everything followed this script until he noticed among the guests the familiar face of Prosecutor Mallara. The same one who had shielded the driver responsible for the accident that took his wife's life. The oversight official was actively drinking and frequently joining the dance floor. Emilio felt uneasy and stepped outside for some fresh air. Near the restaurant, he noticed a homeless woman. She was fairly young, dressed in rags, yet even they couldn't hide her beauty. Emilio caught himself feeling sorry for her. After all, fate had brought her to the streets. The woman looked at Emilio with confusion and asked him for money, supposedly for a ticket home. "Sorry, I only have my card with me," he replied. She nodded understandingly and sadly returned to her cardboard near the entrance. Meanwhile, Alonso noticed his friend's absence and followed him. "Are you okay?" he asked his friend, who stood near the restaurant. "Yes, everything's fine," Emilio replied. "Don't lie, you don't look all right." "What happened?" the groom insisted. "I saw that prosecutor among the guests. Remember I told you how he shielded the driver who hit Laura? Well, he's here." "I don't know whose side," the surgeon confessed honestly. "He's here on Catalina's side," Alonso replied. "He's some kind of distant uncle of hers, I think. She doesn't even like him much, didn't want to invite him, but her parents insisted. Said he's a useful person, might come in handy in life." "That's for sure." Emilio smirked. "Friend, I'm sorry, I didn't know it was him who ruined everything back then," the groom apologized. "If I had known, I would have insisted he not be at the celebration." "Oh, come on. It's all right. You and Catalina have nothing to do with this. It's my personal issue, don't worry about it. But I think I'll go now. Thank you for the invitation, the celebration was absolutely wonderful. Wishing you and your wife all the love, take care of each other," Emilio said, heading towards his car. But Alonso stopped him and asked him to stay a little longer to watch the young couple dance. The guest agreed. He returned to the hall, where romantic music was playing, and the young people were spinning around the room with smiles on their faces, to the applause of the guests. However, soon the mood changed sharply. A siren sounded in the restaurant, and an announcement was made to evaluate the premises. Due to faulty wiring, a fire had started, guests started fleeing in panic. A crush formed. Those who had drunk the least had an advantage. Their minds were clear, they were steady on their feet, and they could move quickly. Everyone rushed out, or so it seemed at first. However, one of the guests noticed that Prosecutor Mallara was nowhere to be seen. He was drunk and unable to leave the heavily smoke-filled hall. Firefighters arrived at the scene, and the ambulance was on its way. Rescuers carried Senora Mallara and, unexpectedly, the same homeless woman who had been begging for alms at the restaurant entrance. Apparently, she had rushed into the hall in search of food, ignoring the deadly danger. Both the prosecutor and the homeless woman now looked similar, covered in soot, dirty, with unclear consciousness. Fortunately, the others escaped with only a mild fright. But those who were injured clearly needed medical help. Since the ambulance was still on its way, they needed a doctor on site. A quick roll call revealed that Emilio was the only doctor among the guests. "Please, help Alfredo." A woman in gold and pearls rushed towards him. She was either the prosecutor's wife or sister. However, the doctor ignored her request and first started to help the homeless woman, despite all persuasions. "Everyone in line," Emilio said with metallic tones in his voice, barely holding back from shouting that he didn't want to help the man at all. The homeless woman began to improve visibly, and the doctor quickly revived her. However, Senor Mallara was feeling ill, and remained so until the ambulance arrived. "Well, you know," Emilio said to the prosecutor's companion angrily, "we won't leave it like this. I just did my job. For me, all people are equal regardless of their status. I try to live by conscience and justice, unlike many others," the doctor replied calmly to her. He stayed briefly with the woman he had saved. She managed to say her name was Leonor, tears in her eyes, and begged him not to abandon her. However, they were already putting her on a stretcher and carrying her to the ambulance. Emilio managed to ask which hospital they were taking her to. Her gaze struck him deeply, and the doctor decided he would definitely visit the unfortunate woman in the future. At the very least, he would bring her food and clean clothes. Apparently, there was no one else to do it for her. However, enough heavy thoughts for today. It was not the easiest day, Emilio pondered on his way home. Well, went out to unwind. However, he caught himself thinking that this day had been tougher for Alonso after all. The wedding they had prepared with Catalina turned out to be ruined. The next day, the surgeon called his friend to offer support, but surprisingly, Alonso sounded upbeat. Things happen, buddy. Everyone's alive, that's what matters. But this wedding will definitely be remembered by everyone for a long time, his friend replied and then added, honestly, I'm more worried for you. Why is that? Emilio wondered. Because this wonderful Malara family doesn't let their words go to waste. And if they promise to retaliate because you refuse to help the prosecutor after the fire, rest assured they'll keep their word, Alonso explained. Well, whatever happens, happens. I'm not too bothered by it, I've become fatalistic, the surgeon replied. Well, let's hope it blows over. But Catalina and I have firmly decided we want nothing more to do with this family, despite their connections and influence, his friend added before saying goodbye and hanging up. Emilio decided not to take his friend's words too close to heart and continued living his usual life. As planned, he went to the hospital to visit Leonor. She was barely recognizable. The hospital staff had washed and fed her, and she looked transformed. She couldn't have been more than 30. She looked at her savior with embarrassment. Do you recognize me? The guest asked her with a smile. I do, Leonor replied with the same bashful smile. Thank you for saving me. It's my job, Emilio shrugged. Here, I brought you some fruits and a robe with slippers. But it seems they've already provided you with everything you need? You're very kind, thank you, Leonor thanked him. They chatted for a couple more minutes, and then the surgeon bid her goodbye. However, instead of going home, he stopped by the chief physician's office. They were acquainted. How is she? Emilio asked. If you're asking about the aftermath of the fire, she'll be fine. She'll stay with us for a couple more days and will be as good as new. But if you mean her overall condition, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. She has memory loss, likely due to her injuries. There are bruises and abrasions on her body. Someone probably beat her. From her speech, she seems to be quite decent. I think we need to start looking for her relatives. But here's the problem, she only remembers her name, she doesn't recall her surname, the chief physician explained. I believe together we can help her. I'll contact the police and volunteers, Emilio declared. Thank you, the doctor thanked him. With enthusiasm, the surgeon took on the task and reached out to the investigators, but they responded aggressively. And what are your intentions inquiring about her, sir? They asked him. Who is she to you? No one. Just a person in need of help, Emilio replied. Well, the key phrase here is no one, so thank you for your vigilance. But please move along and mind your own business, don't interfere in others, the police officers rebuked him. Emilio left without saying goodbye. He was increasingly disillusioned with the work of the authorities. However, despite this, he decided not to abandon Leonor. But when he unexpectedly arrived at the hospital, he was simply not allowed in. The chief physician looked at him apologetically, as if to say, sorry, but there's nothing I can do. Emilio decided not to dwell on it and let the situation go. After all, he truly was a stranger to Leonor. It was even fortunate that she ended up in the hospital after the fire. Surely, she would receive the help she needed now. He returned to his previous life of work-homework. Initially, he was a bit concerned about the prosecutor's wife's words, but then he forgot about them altogether. It was all posturing, he reasoned. It seemed that Alonso worried more about it. he regularly asked his friend if everything was okay with him. "Buddy, don't worry, everything will be fine with me. I'm just startled. And by the way, are you really preparing to become a father?" Emilio asked. "Yes, Catalina is pregnant," Alonso confirmed. "And as for not having anything to lose, there's always something to lose. If not for yourself, think about your parents. They worry a lot about you." "Well, que sera, Sarah." Emilio philosophically concluded the conversation. However, the scenario took a turn for the worse. Vengeful Senor Malara and his wife decided not to back down from their malicious principles and exact revenge in action. They operated in the best traditions of cunning. They waited for the victim to relax, and only then did they strike. So what did they do? They planted a mole. Amidst the flow of surgeries and patients Emilio attended to, many wanted to thank the doctor for his efforts and for saving lives. In most cases, the doctor declined. He did his job not for gratitude. Helping people was his calling. Yet sometimes, particularly persistent ones insisted on expressing their gratitude. However, in such cases, it usually amounted to small sums of money or gifts like candies and alcohol. "I don't need any problems, and a simple thank you is gratitude enough," Emilio usually said. However, this time was special. Together with his colleagues, the surgeon had performed a unique spinal operation on a young girl. The doctors reinforced the vertebrae with bone cement, which had been affected by a benign tumor, and then swiftly implanted a disc. Such a neurosurgical operation was quite rare overall, and in their region, it was the first of its kind. Most importantly, the surgery was successful, and the girl was cured. The recovery process began. One May evening, after all his colleagues had left, Emilio stayed behind in the operating room to finish up important tasks. It wasn't the first time he had worked late. He was so engrossed in the process that he was completely lost in his thoughts. Thus, he startled when there was a knock on the door. "Who's there?" he asked. "Oh, doctor, I'm sorry if I frightened you," came a timid female voice, and a woman in her 40s entered the room. "I'm Aunt Esther Tabora, whose spine you operated on. How did you get in here?" "It's late. We don't receive visitors," Emilio said to her. "Kind people let me in. I told them I had an urgent matter to discuss with you," the guest explained. "And what urgent matter is this?" the doctor inquired. "I want to thank you for saving the life of my beloved girl. Without you, she would have been lost," the woman said, almost in tears. "Her parents already conveyed their thanks to me. That's quite enough," the surgeon said in a metallic tone, understanding where this was heading. Yes, I know about that. But considering the amount of work you've done, I feel that mere thanks wouldn't suffice, so I'm not empty-handed." "This is for you," the visitor said, placing a thick envelope on the doctor's desk, clearly containing a substantial amount of bills. "What are you doing?" "I won't accept this under any circumstances." "Take it and leave," the doctor commanded, but the woman had already left the operating room. Emilio stepped into the corridor to catch up with the stranger and return the envelope, but she was nowhere to be seen. He returned to his office, counted the money. There were 1,000 euros in the envelope, an outrageous sum that needed to be disposed of urgently. He firmly decided that the next morning he would give this money to the young patient's parents. But leaving it in the hospital now was risky, so the doctor put the envelope in his backpack and left the operating room. It was time for him to head home urgently. Fatigue was already clouding his vision. However, he didn't get far. As soon as he left the hospital grounds, he was immediately detained by the police. "What's going on?" the man protested. "You are being detained on suspicion of accepting a large bribe," they replied. And then Emilio realized that this was the prosecutor Malara's revenge. He had no doubts that this spectacle had been orchestrated by his people, and the woman who had approached him with a pitiful look and offered him money was simply a pawn. Criminal proceedings were initiated against the surgeon under the charge of accepting a bribe. The maximum punishment that awaited him was 3 years of imprisonment and a colossal fine. All of his colleagues and friends in the medical field were shocked. They knew very well that he was an honest man and an excellent surgeon who had never engaged in bribery. He always strictly adhered to the letter of the law. "My friend, I feel guilty for what happened," Alonzo said to him during their meeting in jail. "What do you have to do with this?" Emilio chuckled, visibly worn out after a week spent away from home. "Well, how can I not? It's all because of that stupid incident at the wedding. We both understand perfectly who orchestrated this whole bribery story." "Who's behind it?" Alonzo replied. "You have nothing to do with this, it's just about his vile nature. Apparently, he simply enjoys causing trouble for others," the surgeon said. "Well, never mind. I have a good lawyer, we'll handle this. Thank you for your support." The lawyer was indeed experienced and competent. Moreover, he was passionate about his work because he believed in his client's innocence. However, when your opponent is one of the most influential people, sheer determination alone is not enough. The doctor understood this and was already preparing himself for spending the coming years in prison. But he had already resigned himself to this thought and wasn't overly concerned for himself. What worried him much more was how his elderly parents would take the news. Emilio feared that his parents' hearts might not withstand the shock of hearing that their son had been imprisoned. "Please, let's do everything possible to save me. Especially for their sake. I won't forgive myself if I ruin them, even indirectly," the surgeon pleaded with his defender. The lawyer nodded understandingly and promised to do everything in his power. Meanwhile, the trial date was approaching. With each passing day, the tension grew more and more palpable. Then, just a few days before this crucial moment, it was announced that the lawyer had been hospitalized with acute appendicitis and would not be able to represent his client in court. Emilio's entire family was in shock, one misfortune after another. "Don't worry, we will definitely come up with something. I won't abandon my client. I'll simply entrust his case to the capable hands of my colleague. Now we just need to decide who would be best suited for this role," reassured the interested parties. There was nothing else to be done but to rely on fate. Emilio had no time to meet and discuss with the new lawyer. Meanwhile, the day of the trial was looming. On the night before, the man didn't sleep a wink. He didn't know what awaited him. The uncertainty frightened him and knocked the ground from under his feet. He entered the courtroom utterly sleepy and disoriented. A lump formed in his throat at the sight of his grief-stricken parents. His mother couldn't hold back her tears and wept openly, while his father remained composed, though it was clear he too was at his breaking point. Emilio took his seat, feeling defeated, and saw Prosecutor Malaro with his customary smug look. "I simply have no chance," thought the surgeon, and at that very moment, an incredible beauty in a sharp business suit and high heels confidently entered the courtroom, purposefully clicking her heels. Her posture was upright, her expression radiated confidence. As she appeared, whispers spread throughout the room, everyone speculated about who she might be. The stranger's facial features seemed familiar to Emilio. His surprise was immense when the woman approached him and introduced herself. "Hello. I'm Leonor Baena, your lawyer. I'll be representing you today." "You?" Emilio exclaimed in surprise. "Then the fire at the restaurant? That was you?" "Yes," the lawyer replied curtly. "But that's not important right now. Please focus on what's happening and be patient, everything will be fine." Those words restored his hope. The mere presence of this woman, who had been homeless just a few months ago, now appearing in a completely new light, seemed like a miracle. If such a shocking transformation was possible, why couldn't he believe that today Emilio would not be imprisoned? He caught himself smiling for the first time in a long while. Leonor noticed and smiled back in response. It was evident that the appearance of such a lawyer surprised not only the defendant but also everyone else in the courtroom. Senor Malara even blushed from the tension. He was never good at hiding his emotions. Meanwhile, the trial began. In the coming hours, the fate of the talented surgeon would be decided. When it was time for the defense to present its case, Leonor stood up from her seat and spoke with a confident voice. Your Honor, she began, I want to inform the public that Emilio Morales has become a victim of a cruel and deceitful conspiracy. And now I will present evidence that leaves no doubt that this is exactly what happened. Whispers swept through the courtroom again, everyone was shocked. Meanwhile, Leonor continued. She narrated the story to all present about the complex surgery Emilio had performed on the young woman and about the pawn who had tried to bribe him. This woman, in reality, has no relation to the young patient. This is confirmed by the girl's family. So what was her interest in giving money to the doctor? An act of goodwill? Unlikely. A fraudulent scheme aimed at discrediting a brilliant doctor with an impeccable reputation? Now that seems more likely, the lawyer explained. Afterward, she presented a series of evidence proving her client's innocence. She explained that he had intended to return the money the next day, although they didn't even know about it. She also called witnesses who testified in his favor. The picture became very clear. Emilio Morales was not guilty. The joy of the surgeon and his family was immense when, in the end, these words were spoken by the judge. He acquitted the doctor and completely cleared him of all charges. Emilio was released the same day. He couldn't believe what had happened and even shed tears. His entire family cried tears of happiness and joy that justice had finally prevailed. Despite Prosecutor Malara's displeased look, who seemed ready to burst with indignation right there in the courtroom. His cunning plan had failed, and he didn't know how to accept defeat. Soon after his release, Emilio received a call from Alonzo. Friend, I congratulate you. I'm so glad everything worked out. Alonzo shouted joyfully into the phone. Thank you, the acquitted surgeon sincerely thanked him. I'm having a double celebration today, Alonzo continued. You've been released, and my son was born. Wow. Then congratulations to you. What an event. I'm happy for you and Catalina. What did you name the boy? The doctor asked. Emilio, in your honor, Alonzo replied with a smile in his voice. It's a great honor for me, thank you, the doctor responded, tears welling up in his eyes from the unexpected news. And a great responsibility, I'll strive to be a worthy example for my namesake. Once I've gathered myself and settled in, I'll come visit with gifts and meet little Emilio. Deal, Alonzo replied. For now, Emilio indeed needed time to overcome the shock and rethink what had happened. He went from the courtroom to his parents' home, needing to be with his loved ones in an environment of care and warmth. He needed rest, to gather strength, and to eat normal home-cooked meals. His mother and father surrounded him with utmost care. During a celebratory dinner, as everything worst was now behind them, the conversation turned to his savior. Now that's a woman. Heroic. How confidently she carried herself and spoke on point. She completely demolished the prosecution's case. Where do they find such people? His father remarked. We must definitely thank her, agreed his mother. Yes, I'll do that, nodded Emilio, deciding not to disclose to his parents the details he already knew about Leonor, especially given the strange circumstances of their meeting. The surgeon expected the lawyer to reach out to him, but she did not. So, he decided to search for information about her online and stumbled upon several interesting articles about the unfortunate woman who had married badly. Successful lawyer becomes victim of tyrant husband. Abused by spouse, female lawyer puts him behind bars. The internet was full of such headlines, and Emilio found himself with too many questions. It seems I've become a real detective hero. Well, I've always loved this genre. I'll try to unravel the tangle of mysterious intricacies, Emilio said, looking at his gaunt reflection in the mirror. To start with, Emilio needed to find the contact details of the mysterious lady lawyer. He didn't anticipate it would be easy. However, he encountered difficulties right from the very first step. The surgeon called his lawyer, who was recovering but still in the hospital. I wanted to thank you for your support and assistance, as well as for passing my case to a qualified specialist at the most critical moment. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about her now. Can you give me Leonor Baena's contact information? The doctor asked. Emilio, I'm glad everything worked out for the best despite my illness, the lawyer replied. But as for Leonor, she reached out to me herself when she found out I was hospitalized, even though she was supposed to defend you. She volunteered to defend your honor and promised to handle everything in the best possible way. She mentioned she had a personal interest. I was in such a state that I couldn't grasp the essence of her words, so I simply chose to trust her. Who is she, anyway? I googled her, and there's some strange personal history with her husband, Emilio inquired. Yes, there was that, but it's her personal matter. I don't think I have the right to elaborate on that. But she's a very strong lawyer, despite her relatively young age. Her competence is acknowledged by everyone in our professional community, the lawyer replied. I see, thank you, the surgeon responded. Despite not managing to promptly obtain Leonor's contacts, Emilio decided not to give up. Thankfully, living in the age of information technology, he found numerous numbers associated with the lawyer online. However, they were all work-related. Emilio called them, some went to voicemail, others were answered by her assistants. He persistently asked them to share Leonor's contact or connect him directly with her, but he was always refused. Left with no other choice, he decided to wait for her near her office. Emilio spent several evenings on this, and catching Leonor turned out to be not so simple. However, just when the surgeon was almost giving up hope, luck finally smiled on him. The woman exited her office closer to 9 in the evening, looking very tired. Workaholic, Emilio thought. How familiar this is. He got out of his car and approached the lawyer. She didn't notice him immediately and even jumped slightly in surprise, but quickly recognized the stranger and sighed. Oh, it's you? You scared me, she said. I apologize, Emilio replied. But I had no choice but to wait for you. I really wanted to thank you for everything you've done for me. There simply was no other way. I have to give you credit, you're simply elusive. That's true, I won't deny it, she replied, slightly embarrassed. But I honestly don't see the point in our meeting. You once saved me. This time I saved you. We're even. I simply fulfilled my duty, nothing more. I don't need any other thanks. This speech struck Emilio as very familiar. He himself had often said similar things to his patients. But this time, he didn't lose his composure. I respect your opinion, but still, I really wanted to talk to you. There's no talk of bribery or material thanks, don't worry, reassured the surgeon. Eventually, she agreed. They decided to sit down at the nearest restaurant. Not for long, though. I'm very tired, completely exhausted, Leonor requested. Of course, as you wish, nodded Emilio. Once the new acquaintances were seated at the table, rain began to fall outside. How lucky we ended up here, smiled the man. Except if I hadn't met you now, I'd already be home, then yes, quite lucky, the woman joked with a kind smile. I assure you I won't take up much of your time, Emilio replied. And so, what did you want to talk to me about? Leonor asked and placed her order. I'll have a steak, a vegetable salad, and a cup of coffee. And maybe cheesecake too. Her companion couldn't hide his surprise. I simply didn't eat anything all day. I had porridge for breakfast at 8, and that's it, didn't eat a crumb since, explained Leonor. You don't take care of yourself, Emilio replied. Judging by your emaciated appearance, you don't exactly follow healthy eating principles either, she said. Just don't put your finger in your mouth, the surgeon noted to himself. Meanwhile, Leonor returned to the main topic of their meeting and once again asked Emilio to ask the questions that interested him. To be honest, I would like to understand all the nuances of this mystical story. The restaurant, the dirty, hungry, ragged woman near its entrance, the fire, the miraculous rescue, and then an equally miraculous transformation. If someone had told me this was possible, I would have just laughed and said it's probably a script from a fantasy movie, Emilio explained. Well, I'm a straightforward person by nature, so there's no point in lying. I'll tell you everything as it is. Just with your permission, I'll eat while I talk. I'm very hungry, Leonore replied and began cutting into her steak. I'm all for it. Enjoy your meal, said the man. The woman began to acquaint the surgeon with her story. She was born into a simple, large family, being the oldest. Her mother gave birth to 2 more girls, and Leonore constantly had to take care of them. Her father drank and abused her mother, sometimes even the girls. But her mother turned a blind eye to it all and continued to endure everything. When Leonore became old enough, she asked, why didn't her mother divorce him? What are you saying? What divorce are you talking about? I'm a respectable woman, and all sorts of rumors will start swirling around me. Besides, where would I go with 3 kids? Who would want someone like me, reasoned the miserable, beaten down woman in every sense. You need yourself first and foremost. You, wisely reasoned the 13-year-old girl. Is your reputation worth sacrificing your happiness for? Let's leave him. Don't torment us or yourself. You'll find a job, we'll have enough money. Anyway, almost everything now goes to vodka for Dad. If anything, I'll find some odd jobs and help out. In response, Leonore received a slap. The girl rubbed her burning cheek and realized there was no point in bringing up the topic again. Her mother wouldn't change her mind anyway. So she firmly decided to endure until the end of school, get into college, move into a dorm, and start her own independent life. Let her parents decide how to live from then on. The girl felt a bit sorry for her sisters, who also became hostages of the situation, but she couldn't help them either. First, she needed to save herself. Maybe later, when I stand on my own feet, I'll also help them, but not now, thought Leonore. After enduring a couple more years, the girl realized her plan. She had loved detective series since childhood, so she dreamed of entering law school and then obtaining a specialized higher education. Teachers and friends discouraged her from taking this step, convincing her that without money and connections, she wouldn't succeed. But Leonore proved with her own example that this wasn't true. Thanks to her bright mind and hard work, she became a student and immediately moved into a dormitory. The room was cramped and simple, shared with 2 roommates. But even in these conditions, it was more convenient and comfortable for her than being at home with her alcoholic father. The girl firmly decided for herself that she would never repeat her mother's fate and wouldn't choose an abuser as her husband. And, in general, she didn't plan to engage in personal life, at least not in the first few years. She needed to focus on her studies. Besides, she needed to work part-time to have money to live on. Leonore got a job as a waitress. During the day, she studied diligently, and in the evenings, she served guests at an entertainment venue. In other words, she was spinning like a squirrel in a wheel. Her roommates marveled at how she managed to do everything. If you want to live, you have to keep moving, joked the hard-working girl. Well, that's true, but there are other ways to settle well in life, her friends replied. What other ways? Leonore wondered. Well, for example, find a well-off guy and marry him, her friends answered. That's what we plan to do. No way, that's not for me. Leonore said. I won't depend on a man. My goal is to become an independent, educated woman who is her own boss. You're so naive, Leonore, her friends chuckled. We'll see about that, the girl replied, continuing to diligently focus on her studies. She graduated from college with honors and, as planned, entered university. She passed a tough competition, which was an additional reason for pride. Her classmates were all from wealthy families. The young men and women were dripping with money, dressed in designer clothes, and had lunched not in the cafeteria, but in expensive restaurants for business lunches. It was tough for Leonore, but she resolved not to deviate from her goal. Ignoring her surroundings, she continued to tackle the challenges of her studies, all while keeping her job as a waitress. She hardly communicated with her family. Her father continued to beat her mother and drink, while her mother endured it all. Her younger sisters were finishing school. One of them, Zita, sided with their mother and planned to stay in the family. She aimed to study to become a chef, marry someone as soon as possible, have children, and not complain about her fate. The other, Melita, envisioned a completely different scenario for herself. She admired her older sister's courage and wanted to follow in her footsteps. She aimed to excel in her exams, get into college, and eventually became an engineer. She moved out from her parents' home and started working part-time as well. Leonore helped her get a job as a waitress in her place, while Leonore herself became an intern at a law firm where she was invited after being noticed during her course. The girl quickly proved herself brilliantly and was soon hired full-time. Her salary increased, and Leonore could afford to rent an apartment. Her career was on the rise, and she was still a student. Meanwhile, their father passed away from liver cirrhosis. Their mother was devastated and unexpectedly started blaming her eldest daughter for everything. "It's all because of you. You abandoned us for a better life when we needed support and help. Family means nothing to you. What have I raised?" the grief-stricken woman shouted at the funeral. Leonore didn't know how to respond to this accusation. She categorically denied any fault, understanding that it was her father's alcoholism that led to his grave, not her desire to live normally. It became clear that convincing her mother otherwise was impossible. The only solution was to sever ties completely. If they had barely communicated before, now it was as if they had forgotten each other's existence. Among the relatives, only Melita remained close to her. Unlike Zita, she sided with her older sister. Breaking away from her family was quite painful, but knowing that the truth was on her side greatly helped Leonore. Nevertheless, the words about family meaning nothing to her echoed painfully in her heart. The girl wanted to prove otherwise. At the same time, fortunately, Ronaldo, a classmate, son of the head of a notary firm, took an interest in her. He was a smart guy who admired Leonore's perseverance, a simple girl who achieved everything on her own in life. It flattered Leonore. She couldn't even imagine what could interest such a guy. But things turned out differently. In principle, Ronaldo had never been of special interest to her. He seemed arrogant and conceited, despite his brilliant intellect. "Sis, it's not worth it. It won't end well," Melita warned Leonore, who had confided her romantic feelings to her. "Why do you think that? Do you think I'm not worthy of someone like him?" the elder sister asked, offended. "You deserve the best of everything, but I'm not sure if Ronaldo is exactly the best option," Melita replied. "But of course, the decision is yours." Leonore decided to take the risk. She accepted the courtship of a wealthy man who could afford grand gestures and skillfully dazzled her, expensive gifts, jewelry, huge bouquets. No matter how hard she tried not to lose her mind, under such pressure, it was extremely difficult for her. Meanwhile, Ronaldo, who initially planned just to play around with this smart classmate, unexpectedly found himself genuinely falling in love with her. Eventually, it led to him proposing to her after university. This shocked his parents, who had dreamed of a more advantageous match for their son. His father vehemently opposed and threatened to disinherit him. His wife supported him, but Ronaldo was determined. "Well, fine then. I don't need your money, and I don't need your connections either. I'll achieve everything on my own," the young man yelled. "Who are you kidding, Ronaldo?" his father retorted. "You're just a lazy playboy who's used to getting money from me. Your ideal scenario is working at my firm where you can continue to slack off and still get paid for it. So that's what you think of me? Fine. I'll prove you wrong," Ronaldo replied, and he walked out on his family. A couple of months later, Ronaldo and Leonore got married. She had mixed feelings about it. She didn't want to break family ties, but she also understood the risk of her inexperienced husband becoming dependent on her. She would have to work twice as hard to support both herself and him. Luckily, Ronaldo had his own apartment, and his father couldn't take it away. The young couple moved into a spacious 3-room apartment and didn't yet think about having children. Leonore was focused on her career, which was flourishing spectacularly. In contrast, Ronaldo's career stagnated. He remained mediocre at the neighboring law firm. He failed case after case and was constantly on the verge of being fired until he was finally let go. He stayed at home, not even attempting to find a new job. For the first couple of months, Leonor looked on with indulgence, but eventually she became angry. "Ronaldo, how long is this going to continue? It's hard for me to support both of us. Shall I arrange for you to join our firm?" the woman proposed. "No, I won't," the man refused. "It would be humiliating. I'd just pale in comparison to you. I don't want to become an object of ridicule." "So you'd rather slack off and live off your wife?" Leonor snapped, growing increasingly frustrated. Ronaldo didn't respond to this, but after that conversation, he became angry with his wife. And then the worst began. He started drinking. At first, just a little, so his wife didn't notice anything. But with each passing day, the destructive habit became more and more pronounced. Eventually, when the woman came home, she would simply find scattered empty bottles and Ronaldo asleep on the couch. "I warned you," Melita would tell her. "Nothing good comes from getting involved with that golden youth. You've repeated our mother's path, despite trying your best to avoid it." "You're right," Leonor nodded meekly. "But what should I do now?" "Divorce, what else? You advised our mother to leave our father at one time." "Haven't you remembered?" asked Melita. "Yes, I remember, of course. But now I understand our mother too. I don't want to rush into divorce. What if he changes?" she reasoned. Melita sighed disappointedly. She herself was in a relationship with a simple guy who worked at a printing press. They didn't earn much money, but they lived peacefully and harmoniously, saving up together for an apartment. As for Leonor, her hopes were dashed. Ronaldo couldn't quit drinking. Moreover, like his father once did, he began to lose control. It started with a slap, then escalated to punches. Bruises appeared on Leonor's body. She had to buy the most expensive concealer to cover them up and hide them from others. The conflict intensified day by day, yet for some reason, Leonor endured, not understanding what was keeping her from leaving. Eventually, she decided to give these relationships one last chance. A vacation. "We just need a vacation together. It will unite us and help solve all our problems," she reasoned. The woman decided that she and her husband needed to go to the seaside. They decided to drive there. According to Leonor, the road romance was supposed to help overcome their conflict. Ronaldo eagerly agreed. Whatever else, he loved to vacation. Besides, his wife took care of all the expenses. So they headed south. Initially, everything was fine. The husband and wife enjoyed themselves, affectionately chatted with each other as in their youth. But then the nature of the trip abruptly changed. During one of the stops, Leonor noticed her husband secretly drinking beer. She didn't like it and made a comment to Ronaldo. He became angry. The spouses got back into the car and continued their journey. In the car, Leonor continued scolding her husband and asking him not to drink alcohol, especially while driving. Eventually, Ronaldo snapped, stopped on the outskirts of the nearest town, beat Leonor nearly to death, and threw her out of the car. The woman lost her memory and wandered around in a daze. That's how she ended up at the restaurant, then the wedding, the fire, the hospital. Fortunately, she fell into the hands of volunteers. They posted notices online asking for relatives of the poor woman to come forward. Melita saw her sister's photo and took her in. Fortunately, her memory was restored fairly quickly. The woman immediately filed for divorce and put her husband in prison, despite the efforts of his influential father to protect him. Despite their long-standing conflict, he decided to intervene in the situation. But Leonor couldn't betray her principles and let the situation go unchecked. In the end, justice prevailed and Ronaldo was sent to prison. Meanwhile, Leonor recovered and resumed working. "Well, that's basically my story," Leonor concluded. "I decided to help you out of a sense of duty, as I mentioned before. Besides, I knew that Senor Mallara was behind all this. He has a terrible reputation." "I'm very grateful to you," Emilio responded, impressed. for helping me avoid prison, and for the honesty with which you shared your story. You're an amazing woman. Thank you, but it doesn't make it any easier, Leonore replied sadly, then added, I've given up on my personal life. It seems my fate lies in my work. I'll continue practicing law, which I happen to be quite good at. You know, at a certain point in my life, I also threw myself into work, Emilio shared. And what contributed to that? Leonore inquired. Emilio then told her the tragic story of his wife's death. I'm sorry for your loss, Leonore said sincerely. Thank you, Emilio acknowledged. But you know what? Over time, I realized that life goes on, no matter what. We should try to find joy in small things and not give up. Maybe, after all, things will be okay with our personal lives. Do you think so? Leonore asked hopefully. Yes, he affirmed. To test my theory, I'd like to invite you on a date. I know a great place, a cozy restaurant by the river. What do you think about that? To be honest, I'm skeptical, Leonore admitted. But nevertheless, I'm willing to take the risk, she smiled. Hope gleamed in both their eyes, and the new day promised to be much brighter than the ones before.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.